Hello. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Everyone who are present in house and on YouTube and online through any media. Very, very welcome to Wembley Inner Space. Very, very welcome to Tuesday's Talk in English. And the topic for today is expectation to acceptance. What a beautiful topic. And we have Matthew Earl with us, talking to us, giving us insight on, instead of expecting, how we can accept the situations and be free. Okay, let me introduce him. Let me introduce Matthew. Matthew, a science graduate and a spiritual skeptic. But his interest in self-development led him to explore meditation, like most of us do. And then he began teaching to pass on his insights and the techniques he practically used, which take all areas of life to a completely different level. And he takes simple and very profound methods that work practically and communicates them to great effect. Almost 19 years, he continues to teach Raj Yoga meditation in the form of courses, talks, and workshops. He is very much based in London, and professionally, he works as head of business growth for an IT consultancy. And we are very lucky to have him this evening on this special topic on expectation to acceptance. Very welcome, Matthew, on board. Welcome. I'll pass you now, and then you can share your views on it, and then we'll meet later on. Okay? Thank you, Matthew. Bye.
Everybody here and also joining online. I hope everybody's okay. I won't say warm welcome because I think that's obvious today. I hope everybody's doing okay in these very, very warm temperatures. If you're joining from the UK, for those that are joining internationally, I think it's pretty much hot everywhere, so I hope everybody's okay. So an interesting topic, from expectations to acceptance. And let's see where this topic takes us this evening. But basically, I feel that the main issue is an identity crisis that we're facing, and understanding why we have expectations of how certain people should behave towards us, or expectations of how circumstances, how things should go in life, are common to all of us. Why did we develop these expectations? What service do they give us? There's always a reason behind habits that we develop. So rather than just looking at expectations of something which we can become self-critical about, is understanding their origins, and how do we move from expectations which can really limit us and lead us to frustration to a place of acceptance. There's really a lot of things to talk about in this, a lot of things to understand, and revolving around this idea of how we identify with ourselves. I wanted to cover a little bit about this because at a young age, even before we're born, we pick up signals through the senses that we're developing, the 5 senses of the body. And in a way, those 5 senses, the information we take in through our eyes, ears particularly, but also touch, taste and smell. But most of the information for most people through what we see and what we hear, it can almost become like the five senses define who we are, that they create our world. Because in life we become so focused on understanding and taking cues about who we are through these five senses, that really we define ourselves through that information. And this starts us on a road of expectation. It forms certain habitual ways of thinking and feeling that lead to a lot of expectations as we progress in life. And what do I mean by that? Well, very early on we have certain expectations about ourselves that are formed around, for instance, how we're treated in regard to our gender. Oh, you know, she's a beautiful little girl, he's a lovely little boy. And gradually, as we go through life, various aspects of these things get reinforced. And then there are all sorts of cultural, societal inputs that we take. And there are expectations that are almost given to us from outside that we then take inside. And it forms the foundation of our identity. And we really start to identify with the physical body. Of course, the senses are all part of the physical body. So we really identify with this. And that's what actually leads us to an identity crisis, which then causes a lot of suffering and sorrow as we move along in life. Because what we're not connected to is the spiritual truth of the self so much. So we talk about in Raj Yoga meditation about the soul as our true identity. And the soul exists beyond the realm of the five physical senses. And the soul exists in the realm of feelings such as peace and love and total acceptance, actually, of the self. And so all these things are actually natural to us as spiritual beings, but they get educated out of us through our experience of life. And so one of the aspects of this is in language, in vocabulary, and how we're communicated to. I was saying that we take a lot of our input through what's said to us, as well as what we see, how people react to us. But softer words like acceptance, patience, tolerance, which are all really powerful aspects of our true nature. When we're first introduced to them in life, they can often be in quite a negative context. For instance, I may have heard as a child when something is happening that I'm not particularly comfortable with or I don't particularly like, then, oh, you just have to accept it. It's just part of life. Or if I'm getting frustrated about something, oh, you should be more patient, you know. So even these little things that we hear, they're very small things, but they get repeated a lot over our lifetime, and particularly in the early years, when we're very impressionable, we really take these things to heart. So sometimes when we hear about being tolerant or being accepting or being patient, the immediate reaction inside is one of tension. So it's not surprising that we struggle with these concepts and we struggle with moving towards who we really are. And a lot of damage that's been done creates a lot of habitual feelings inside that are then very difficult to let go of. So how do we actually do that? One of the approaches is we might try and reprogram our thinking, you know, read personal development books, positive thinking books, all that is okay. But it tends to just be sort of papering the cracks unless I actually do some work in terms of connecting to my true identity as a soul. Because all of these things are still based on information I'm taking from outside about who I am. And I need to do some deep exploration in terms of really connecting with myself inside as a spiritual being, as a soul. And for that, I need to actually take time out away from the five senses, where I'm turning my attention inside and connecting with myself as a soul. In Raj Yoga, we talk about the soul being a point of light, a conscious point of light, that this is me, behind the eyes, in the center of the forehead. And when I start to practice focusing on myself as a soul, I can start to go beyond all the influences, all the things that I've taken in through the senses over the years, all the impressions that I've taken in about who I am, that are maybe causing me a lot of sorrow at the moment. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But when I look at expectations and how they work, again, when I'm looking at who I am now and evaluating where I am in my life at the moment, in order to make progress, it's really good if I can be more compassionate, more empathetic with myself. One of the things that happens is that the language we hear as we're growing up, that's how we then end up talking to ourselves on the whole. So maybe when, for instance, maybe I'm having difficulty at work with something, pressure at work, and rather than try and give myself understanding around that, most of us will tend to be very self-critical if we actually look at how we're talking to ourselves in our own mind. So actually, a lot of us talk to ourselves far worse than other people talk to us. We can be very, very self-critical. For instance, I may be struggling with stress at work, and rather than trying to talk to myself in a kind way, where I try and understand myself, as maybe I would do for a good friend, I maybe instead say to myself, well, you should be coping better with this. This pressure is not so much, why aren't you handling it better? It's not surprising that other people are criticizing you because you should be doing better at this. So these sort of thoughts, we can be really, really harsh with ourselves. And in a way, we then have expectations of ourselves which are very damaging. And then we tend to, as a coping mechanism, instead of taking all the criticism internally, in order to cope with all this negative emotion, then we'll start to also blame situations outside and other people. And it's just really a way of coping, so that I can get some sense of peace. It doesn't give me real peace, but it gives me some sense of relief. Like sometimes people will say when they get angry, oh, I know I shouldn't get angry, but I feel relieved afterwards because I expelled that built-up tension that was inside. Of course, in the long term, the unfortunate result is that if I continue to do that, that energy will just build and build, and it becomes more and more destructive. And then it becomes a pattern of getting angry. Yeah, sure.
Area. It could be coming from 3-4 areas, and then you reach a stage where you can't cope, and then the anger comes into it.
Yes, sure. I know that online probably only caught the end of that question, but the gentleman was reflecting on the point about pressures at work and how pressure can come from lots of different angles, and it gets to the point where I just can't cope. Is that pretty much what you were? Yeah. Yeah, and so this is the effect over time of pressure, how we respond to pressure and criticism from outside. Gradually it wears us down, and it gets to the point where I literally don't have the inner power to be able to deal with it, and then it gets to be really, really uncomfortable. I start experiencing a lot of sorrow. I may feel stressed all the time. I may start having problems with sleep. I may start developing anxiety issues. These are all very, very common things these days, aren't they? Because actually the outside pressures are just growing and growing. I mean, I don't need to tell anyone that's listening about those. Even the weather is creating pressure for people because they have everything else to deal with, and now the temperature is such that it's causing a new set of issues. But we could spend all night talking about pressures coming in from the outside these days. So these expectations we have of ourselves and others, in a way, are a framework of things we're trying to create some sense of stability in our life. Like, for instance, there are expectations that are linked to basic human needs. So I'm assuming, in this sense, we're talking more about emotional, spiritual, but assuming that things like food, water, and shelter are met, then the other real needs we have around peace of mind is actually the big one. Let's just focus on that for now. And because we have this identity crisis of taking our sense of self from outside cues, we've lost that inner resource of being able to connect to our true nature of peace, which is very, very powerful in the soul, in the self. And because we don't have that resource, that need is not getting met, we look for ways of creating peace outside. So one of those is in creating expectations. I'll give you maybe a silly example, but one you may have is like, it could be that in coping with the day ahead, that you look forward to your first cup of coffee or first cup of tea, and you go to your favorite coffee shop and they've started using a different make of oat milk that you don't like. And you're really disappointed because you have an expectation that you go to a place that you're familiar with. It's your favorite coffee shop. You order your coffee and you're looking for some respite from that drink. So actually it's not silly at all, because we're taking little supports from lots of little things in the day. And these supports are also linked to expectations, if that makes sense. Like, I expect the coffee to be like this. I expect the traffic to be like this. I expect my colleagues to talk to me with respect. I expect. But what I want to move away from is then getting self-critical about expectation, because then it just becomes a negative cycle. So first thing is to say it's okay. In meditation, in Raj Yoga, we teach that one of the biggest challenges people face in meditation that I've found is that when they start doing it, they start to come face to face with these emotions and feelings and thoughts and expectations. And then there's almost like there can be an increase in this sort of disappointment with the self, because I've become more aware of what's going on inside me. But actually to understand that awareness is part of my healing process. So if I at least understand that, then it helps me to continue, rather than to think, oh God, meditation's making me feel worse. I can't concentrate either because my mind is all over the place. But even having that awareness that I don't have control over my thoughts and feelings is a stepping stone. It's a stepping stone to facing the things that aren't really working for me in terms of strategies. And facing that I'm going to have to do some work to look for a new place to get my needs met, that's really sustainable and that's really going to be empowering. I think one of the brothers who was a really great teacher in the Brahma Kumaris, Anthony Strano, once said that anger can be translated into two words: I expect. Because when our expectations aren't met, then at best we get frustrated, but at worst we get angry. And so, expectations, first of all, to have compassion for the self is to understand that, I've had to create these as a framework to support myself. They're not done a great job, and as I get older in life, actually they'll start to not work as well, and the cracks will appear. But I was doing the best I could. So, when I talk to myself in terms of acceptance, one of the big first steps is actually saying, okay, this is where I am now, it's okay. And, I was doing the best I could with the information I had at the time. My experiences in life have led me to this point. I've realized that I need to change something to feel better. It's not working blaming my parents and blaming society, and I have to take responsibility for where I am now, even though I may not feel it's all my creation. One thing we learn in Raj Yoga, that actually wherever we are now, we've created it on some level, because there's a deeper sense of the self that is trying to learn something from the journey of life. And it maybe have brought me to a point of crisis so that I can have some deep realization that's going to help take me closer to who I am. And actually, I feel that, I don't know if people agree with this, but I feel that actually that's happening now on a global scale. There's a school of thought that things happen by chance and things are quite random, and that therefore I may believe that I'm lucky or unlucky, because if I think things happen by chance, then I don't really have any control. But it also may help me feel some relief, because I'm not responsible either. So it can be a strategy where I have this belief, because it relieves me of that self-blame. But again, it's in a limited way that's not going to help me in the long run. If I think everything happens for a reason, then that also can be hard, because I have to take responsibility for where I am in life at the moment. But it also can empower me in that if I've created my situation now, then I can change how I'm thinking and feeling, and that I can create something new. And you could look at all the situations that happen inside in terms of how I'm feeling, and the situations happening outside now seem to be triggering all the worst feelings for most people. They're triggering all the insecurities, all the expectations are not being met. So many things seem to be going wrong, that we could take this as a sign that we really need a paradigm shift, that I need to look at how I'm relating to myself and how I'm relating to other people differently. So this takes us to the practice of Raj Yoga, because in my experience, they're very, very different worlds. Soul consciousness, as we call it, where I'm really connecting with myself as a soul. And all my needs can be met from the connection with myself as a soul. And through that connection, my connection with the divine. The other world is I try and get my needs met from external things, i.e. people and circumstances, which I try and control, because I set a framework of expectations that seem to work for me. Of course, they're very rarely met, so a lot of sorrow and pain comes from that. And of course, when I'm going onto the journey of starting meditation and connecting with myself as a soul, sometimes I'm going to feel that I'm caught in between two worlds. And this is why I think that how we practice meditation is really important. And what I mean by that is that if I I'm just practicing meditation once a day, it's not going to be enough to keep me in any sort of stable state. Because the influences of the senses and old habits and expectations are very, very powerful habits we've developed. They're almost like grooves in a record, in terms of when we repeat habits that are formed around expectations and things that really aren't serving us, they become grooves that we get stuck in. And it's very, very difficult to break away from that. So, talking to the self more nicely and compassionately is one thing, but I really need a lot of power to be able to let go of old habits and expectations and move to a real experience of acceptance. So I was talking earlier on that we have, just to add insult to injury, we have negative connotations with the words themselves based on our experience in life. So, you just have to accept things. I have to reframe that, but how do I do it? Because when I try and do it in my thoughts, it's almost like I'm fighting against a tide of feelings and emotions from the past. Very difficult to change my mind about things, and turning our attention inwards towards the soul. But how we do that is really important, because if I do just do it in the morning or the evening, then because the old habits in the mind are so strong, I'm going to keep getting pulled back into them during the day. So one of the tips that I found really useful is starting with little and often, because it builds a practice of connecting with myself as a soul regularly as I go through the day, and particularly when I'm actually in the process of facing challenges, like the challenges at work or challenges in relationships or whatever challenges I'm facing in the day. Whereas if I try and just meditate in the morning and the evening and leave a big gap in between, it just slides away, and I tend to slide back into old habits. So one of the practices that I've found very helpful is stopping every hour, just for a minute or two, and just to take a step back. And that means just becoming aware of what I'm doing. I might be aware of all the things I have to do, and just mentally putting all that stuff aside and giving myself the space just to disconnect from everything to do with the outside world, and to take my attention inwards towards the soul and reconnect there. Because I don't need to do anything apart from focus on myself as a point of light, and understand that if I develop that practice, that my needs will start to get met from inside. I'll start to connect with and experience peace of mind from the inside. And that what I've found is that the expectations, the different ways I was trying to get peace from the outside, the reliance on those start to dissolve away naturally. So rather than me having to forcefully try and change my thinking, or think too much about how am I going to change my thinking, it's actually a process that happens very powerfully and naturally when I go into silence. So I think it's a good time to stop and try some silence. So I'd ask you all just to sit comfortably. And one of the things to become aware of is most of my thoughts and feelings are underpinned with some sort of urgency or frustration in the day as I start to engage with activities that I have to do. And just to become aware of that and say to myself, well, it's good that I'm noticing that. It's a positive step just to notice that. Not to allow the thought to come, oh, but you should be coping better, or you should be able to deal with it. Okay, those thoughts will come. I just gently say, okay, well, that's not helpful for me right now. I want to focus on a more positive connection with myself. I want to learn to relate to myself in a different way. This much more assertive but gentle language. So in meditation, I'm not just trying to, or I'm not at all trying to stop my thoughts, but I am trying to redirect them into a more kind, loving, understanding conversation. And one thing to notice is that thoughts that are based around expectation may have frustration, disappointment mixed in. They also lack the quality of patience. They lack the quality of calmness. So to become aware that I want to slow down my thoughts, that the speed of the conversation with myself would benefit from becoming a slower pace. And I move more into a place of silence. The soul, the self. Is a beautiful point of consciousness. Behind the eyes. Aware of the senses of the body. But also detached, separate. Sometimes I find it useful to imagine the soul being in a room behind the eyes. The eyes are like windows in this room that look outwards on the world outside. I, the soul, in this room, I'm separate from the eyes. I'm separate from the outside world, which I see and hear through the senses. And start to reconnect with a sense of self that comes from within the soul. A beautiful, peaceful point of conscious energy. Completely peaceful. Very stable. And I can feel within myself as a soul, it's almost as though acceptance is not needed. It's just automatically there. There's no expectation within the soul. Because the needs of the soul are all met from within. As I tune into this state of being, it's as if the outside world just melts away for a while. And in this consciousness, I'm also tuned in to the energy of the divine, of God. This energy is an incredibly powerful and supportive energy. It has the same qualities as I, the soul. And offers unlimited support to help me reconnect with my own true qualities of peace and contentment. So as I bring my attention back outwards towards the senses of the body and the experiences of the day, I aim to keep a sense of this inner connection with me, and bring this connection of peace and contentment with me into my day. So the connection with the soul has a very stark contrast with the connection with life as I normally experience it through the senses. But as I practice this connection with the soul more and more regularly, over time, I can start to bring this awareness and experience into my daily life. So the old habits, which are really based on a very weak power, because anything that's limited or negative has, although it can be very influential over my life, compared to my own innate power, which is unlimited, beyond my awareness at the moment, the power of the soul, we have very little awareness of just how powerful we are. So when I start to bring this connection into my daily life through practice, then it's a very, very good method of transforming how I feel about myself, getting this internal frame of reference, and dissolving away these old negative patterns of expectation and limitation. Even when we're facing crises in our life, a lot of things that happen in life we can't control. So to develop this inner power is practically very, very useful for me as well. And understanding that I will never be able to get consistent peace and contentment from reliance on the senses. That means reliance on other people, reliance on external events, nature. All of these things are fine. But when I learn to connect to all of them from a true sense of self, then not only will I help myself, but I'll start to be able to help others with whom I'm in connection with as well. And when I do get a chance to do enjoyable things like going out into nature, or I can really appreciate those things. I can see the beauty in those things, but not that I rely on them. Another form of expectation is, I guess, through the word reliance. Like, for instance, with the cup of coffee, but I rely on certain things. I may rely on the fact that if I manage to go for a walk once a day or once a week, then I'll feel better because I'm in nature, and that's fine as well. That's definitely something that is healthy to do. But there may be times when I can't do that, and if I'm relying on that for my sense of well-being, then again, it becomes something that will create frustration in me. So the more I can develop an inner resource and inner stability to feel okay, then the more peaceful and contented I'll feel. Now the strange thing is that when I start to develop that inner power, my experience of life becomes self-directed. So the strange thing is that I actually start to attract more things that will help me with my well-being. So things that seem like chance occurrences, it might be meeting the right person at the right time, or it might be getting the opportunity to go out into nature just when I needed it. Because if I'm putting out that very powerful inner energy that is related to peace, then I will start to actually create more peace in my life automatically. Whereas if I'm relying on things from outside, I tend to create more frustration. These things are almost polar opposites, which is why the contrast can be so stark. That's why I gradually need to, with patience and with self-understanding in how I talk to myself, is gradually to build up this practice over time and allow myself to come face to face with the frustrations that are inside and not worry about them or react to them in a way that stops me continuing with my meditation practice. So quite a few things there, but I think the basic message is a pretty straightforward one, which is that in order to connect to myself as a soul, to connect to myself as who I really am, my true identity, then because my old identity has been created through information through the senses, it makes sense that I need to step back away from the senses at certain times in the day and connect inside. So there are plenty of resources and courses available through Inner Space. For those who haven't, the Raj Yoga meditation course is core foundation for learning how to meditate. How do I actually talk to myself? How do I actually connect with myself as a soul? How do I explore my connection with this divine support that really can help me so much. And by learning those things, that I can develop a daily practice that's really going to support me. So yeah, definitely first thing in the morning, last thing at night, very important for meditation. Start with 5 minutes. Don't worry if some meditations end up leaving you feeling more frustrated, because as we covered, some meditations are just going to increase awareness. I'm still building up my power of peace inside to be able to deal with that awareness. So it's a bit of a play of to and fro, but I just need to develop a consistent practice, Discipline is actually, discipline and repetition are the mother of skill, as they say. That, whether I'm learning to drive a car, I know it's an analogy that's used a lot, but when you first learn to drive a manual car, everything is so clunky, you're having to really think about the gear shift, press the clutch, mirror signal maneuver. There's so many things to remember. But then the beauty of the human mind is that as we practice things more and more, they become habitual and they become more automatic. And so in that sense, meditation is no different. It's just having that right information to allow me to develop this habit of connecting to who I really am. But we have a few more minutes. There's a few other things I could talk about. I just wondered if there's any questions. I don't know if you take questions from online or... Yeah, you do? Okay. While those questions are coming, so just some tips on talking to the self in meditation, because as well as connecting with myself as a soul, the thoughts I'm creating should be really kind and loving. So really paying attention to how I talk to myself. I realized that if somebody I knew a few years ago, before I started meditation, if somebody I knew would talk to me like I talk to myself, I wouldn't want anything to do with them. And that's a bit sad when you're talking about your own mind. So really to be aware. Imagine that if you've got a really, really close friend who's in need, how would you relate to them? How would you talk to them? And very often we find that we think about that, we'd be very patient, we'd listen attentively, we'd really have feelings of empathy, trying to really understand how they're feeling, what they're needing. But when it comes to myself, then I often won't do this. I'll just jump straight into self-critical talk and critical thinking. So really being aware of how I talk to myself, that I'm very understanding and very supportive and patient. And as I develop the habit of meditation and practice that more and more naturally, that patience with the self will grow.
Thank you for the wisdom that you have shared up till now. And there's a question. You spoke about self-talk, which is very critical, and that we expect a lot from ourselves. So one of the questions that we've got is, how about if in your surrounding there is constant criticism? And no matter how much self-respect you have, that you are not that bad as people look at you, but over a long period of time, if that's happening again and again and on a constant level, it's very easy at one point of time to feel or ask the question, am I really like this? And it's not your expectations, but if you are inundated with people's expectations on you, it's not easy to accept that, So how do we cope with that kind of situation where you've tried everything, but it doesn't work?
Yeah, absolutely. There are subtle things usually going on within the self, the whole area of self-doubt versus self-respect, that mean that the way I perceive what other people say to me, I can perceive it as criticism. So there's two things. One is we talk about spiritual power. So not like worldly power, but spiritual power is, if I'm spiritually powerful, then I naturally feel stable. My ability to be patient with people and tolerate is there. Not that it's something I have to put up with this person or I have to tolerate it, but it happens naturally. So one thing is that I need to increase my practice of going into silence. And in that way I will build up the power to be able to remain stable when I'm exposed to external criticism. The other way, which is really useful in terms of understanding language, is to understand that when people criticize me, it's actually really a reflection of how they're feeling about themselves more than how I am. Because when we see each other in a truthful way, in an accurate way, we would actually focus on the good things in each other, the virtues and qualities that we all have. So to understand that when somebody criticizes me, there's some sort of pain that they're experiencing, that the other person is expressing themselves in a way where in some way their needs are not getting met through how they perceive my behavior. So they might see something I'm doing and it doesn't meet their expectation. So then they get frustrated. And often we've learned a language of violence, so rather than communicating really how we're feeling, we tend to criticize one another rather than to say, like for instance, using an example in the home, if a parent wants a child to tidy their room up, and they may just get frustrated over time seeing the mess, and then they'll say to the child, "Oh, you just tidy your room." So the child would naturally perceive that as criticism. But really what the reasons behind that from the parent's point of view is they've got all their own stuff to deal with. They've maybe had a hard day at work, and they come home, and what they're really needing is a peaceful environment. And when things are cluttered and all over the place, actually it creates peacelessness. But if they actually communicated to the child in that way, in a more calm way, that I wondered if you'd be willing to tidy up your toys, because I really need the environment to be peaceful and calm. And when things are all over the place, it makes me feel a little bit frustrated and a little bit nervous, because I don't feel peaceful in the space. Even a child will actually, even though the language sounds quite complicated, respond to the feeling. And then it becomes more of a request to the child rather than a demand that's come from a space of frustration and anger. Now, I can't expect my colleagues and people around me to necessarily have that sort of empathetic language. But if I actually listen to what people are saying, I heard a great phrase from Marshall Rosenberg, who was the guy behind nonviolent communication. And he said, never hear what people think. Always try and tune into what they're feeling and what they're needing. So for instance, if somebody at work is criticizing me, saying, "You should have done that job better. I expected you to do that better. It's not good enough." So if I hear the words, if I hear the thoughts, then it's very violent. Okay? It's very critical. So if I take that in, then it's going to create a lot of pain and resentment. And that could last for months, right? Especially if it's happening every day. But if I really listen to what they're feeling, okay, this person is frustrated. Not frustrated, don't direct it at the self, not frustrated at me, they're just frustrated. And maybe if it's someone who's your boss, maybe they're needing support. So they're actually in a space of feeling scared because they're feeling frustrated, they're not getting the support they need. And they're perceiving that it's you that should be giving them that support, which may not be fair. That's fine. But actually, I've noticed, and I've practiced this a lot, that if you actually have that awareness of when you're listening, if you can just take that time to translate the thought you're hearing, the criticism, into what they're feeling and needing, remarkably what will happen is that I start to develop empathy for their situation. So rather than feeling criticized, I'm starting to feel empathy, which is incredibly powerful. And the interesting thing is, even if I don't say anything, that person will pretty quickly start to respond differently to me because they will feel heard and understood. So there's a lot to learn in language. If I combine that with becoming more powerfully connected to peace through my meditation, the combination of this inner communication changing, how I'm hearing things differently, I'm hearing other people's needs and feelings, then I can transform things. One really important caveat, I have to give myself space for self-empathy. When somebody criticizes me, the first thing I might want to do is strangle them. Now, I have to be accepting of that thought. Because what we normally do is, when we have violent thoughts, we feel worse about ourselves. And then we either internalize it, or we get angry back at this person because we feel ashamed, even more ashamed of who we are. So the first thing is that if somebody criticizes me, sometimes I might need to say, hang on, I just need a few minutes. I'd like to respond to what you're saying, but I just need a few minutes. Because it may be that you need a few minutes for self-empathy. And so it can be just developing that self-respect to ask for that time. You might think, well, my colleague's just going to think I'm weird. But actually that's to do with, again, how I'm feeling about myself. Have I got enough empathy for myself to give myself time? You know, we're so used to having to respond to everything straight away, but that just creates stress. So I need to change the way I'm doing something. There was a great story, I know we're a bit over, but it's very linked to what you said. It was again from, I think, one of Marshall's books on nonviolent communication, and he was talking about this this guy who'd been to one of his workshops, and he was a father, and he used to write himself notes, reminding himself of the steps he needed to take. The first one, to become an observer, to step back and not react straight away to criticism coming from outside or a situation he didn't like. And then tuning into the feelings that he was having and what needs were behind those feelings, and then respond from that place. And he actually had these notes on a little piece of folded paper he used to take to work. And whenever a colleague or anything would happen that he felt stressed, he would say, "Can you just give me a minute?" And he'd unfold this piece of paper. And at first people thought he was just strange, but they grew to respect it because they saw that he was really trying to understand himself, but also respond in a way that would help other people. And he started doing this at home, even with his kids. And after a few months, he stopped using the paper because he could remember the process. And I think he had a 3 or 4 year old child, and something happened one evening in the house. And, the dad went quiet, and then the child said, "Oh, Dad, perhaps you need to go and get you a little bit of paper." But it created a dynamic in the relationships that was based around respect and actually, in meeting my own needs, that also I meet other people's needs. And it really connects to people's hearts. So yeah, combining that with the power of silence from meditation, I think, is a long answer to that, but a very good question.
Hello. Thank you very much, Matthew.
You're welcome.
Inside this beautiful topic of and acceptance. It was such a beautiful, empowering for me, and I'm sure everyone who's listening online must have benefited a lot. And the Raj Yoga meditation, the part it plays for us to accept things instead of expecting, that was very, very good, very powerful for me. I thank you again, Matthew. And next week on Thursday, we have a talk that is befriending higher consciousness by Masana D'Souza. Again, a very good speaker like Matthew. So we look forward to meet you all next Tuesday, same time, 6:45 to 7:45. And if you like to log on to our website, wembley.innerspace.org for the coming up events, talks, and workshops. Okay? Like to meet you next week again. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Om Shanti.